Well, good evening, and welcome to the fourth and final installment of the Northern California chapter of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers in the Actor Studio. And if you think you are out of here at 8, that is fine. We will be here at least till 8:45. So, I have the pleasure and difficulty of trying to constrain to an interview a man who presumptively sired me, my father, Robert Blevans, with whom it's presumptive. I understand it's conclusively presumed at this point, but we have questions. So, a man that I've had the pleasure...
Andrea.
Too late. A man I've had the pleasure of not just being mentored in life for the last 50 years here in a couple of weeks, but also for practicing law now for 13 years, although we are 13 years into what was supposed to be a 5-year gig. So Dad, Bob, depending on where we are and what I call you, 45 years of practicing at this point?
Yep, that would be it.
So I'm turning 50 here shortly, which means that you and Mom had already adopted me at the time that you had decided to go to law school.
So we actually had him before I became a lawyer. I don't know if that makes him a bastard or not, but...
I've been called worse by better. So you've got a wife, you've got me. What were you doing at the time when you decided to go to law school?
I actually did body and fender work for a living while I went to college and law school, and my wonderful wife Jennifer was going to college full-time and then a teaching career and taking care of him, which you talk about a full-time job, and everything about the household. So we had a real busy life, but it was all fun.
And you finished law school in...
1977, which
I always get confused between the 19 and the 18.
Yeah, well, 1977, which is consistent with Madeline, consistent with Jill, and that would make Bill Whiting the outlier.
Yeah. So to put it in perspective for the more... yes, sir, you guys are going.
Your mic dropped. On the left, your mic dropped.
That would be your fault? Okay, I found it.
Welcome to my life. He'll blame you for just about everything.
Okay. We'll try. How's that? You're welcome.
So to
Where was I?
Nowhere that you're going to confess to tonight.
Yes, exactly.
So to put it in perspective to the more youthful amongst us, when you graduated law school in 1977, what was the totality of your student loan debt?
My entire student loan debt was $4,200. The most expensive part of my law school education, by the way, was the 25 cents that you had to pay to get out of the parking lot. So
the $4,200 rounded that you owed, how'd you end up paying it off?
Oh, okay. So I got my sister, my wife, my mother-in-law, talked my brother-in-law and I into doing an interview for a game show called Family Feud. This is the Richard Dawson era, not the Steve Harvey era. And so we did an interview, and they called us back for another interview, and then they called us back and said, you could go on the show. So we went to Burbank, we did the show, and it turned out that between Jennifer and I doing Fast Money, we won $10,427. And Jennifer's share and my share, which I consider to be all community, turned out to be just enough to pay off my student loan, which, as weird as this sounds, when we got home from taping that show, in the mailbox was your student loan is now due.
So
that was it.
It's 1977. You passed the bar on your third attempt.
No. First attempt. By the way, this is my idea of motivation. I called him the night before he started the bar exam, and I wanted to remind him that no one in our family had ever failed to pass the bar exam on the first try. Have a good night's sleep.
Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Blevans on mentorship. So you passed the bar in 1977. What happens next?
I keep doing body and fender work
Why?
because the job offers I had were a 40% cut in pay. I was making $2,500 doing body and fender work a month, and starting county council LA was $1,555 a month, which is a job I ultimately took, at that price anyway.
And did you go to the county council's office?
No, I went to work for a general practice firm, 5 or 6 lawyers, kind of doing everything in downtown Los Angeles.
Now, growing up, I heard the stories about how within about 2 weeks of you starting your first job, which if I remember was on April 1st, so if anybody ever wanted to understand true April Fools, that's when my father became a
that
lawyer.
would have been a clue, wouldn't it?
So within 2 or 3 weeks of starting your first job, you did your first jury trial.
I did.
How did it fare?
I only lost 9-3. Felt pretty good about that. This was a PI case.
Nobody cares. How did you get from being... Nobody cares, and we have to make up for Jill having been here before us. So we got to go. So just kidding, Jill. So how do you go from being a jury trial lawyer to finding yourself as a career in family law?
General practice firm. They wanted to take care of their business clients when they needed a divorce. One of my partners sat me down one day with a very LA law-ish, with a file about this thick, and told me that day after tomorrow I was going to do my first order to show cause. You younger folks, that's a request for order now. For spousal support for the wife of a police lieutenant for the LAPD. And 2 days later, I went to court and I did an order to show cause for spousal support for the wife of a lieutenant at the LAPD.
That would explain the rap sheet. Okay, so you're a family law lawyer in a small general practice firm. How do you maintain relationships with family law colleagues, if you had any?
Well, the lawyers in my firm had done a little bit of family law, but there wasn't really enough to help me kind of get where I wanted to go. And the best thing that happened to me was I got invited by a fellow by the name of Frank Garfield to join their study group. And in Southern California, it's LA at the time, study groups were a really big thing. 14 lawyers. That study group, I was in that study group from 1980 to 1995 when I moved up here. It remained the same 14 people. It was a serious once-a-month meeting. Somebody handled some issue. You talked about what your cases were. You got support for things that you needed. It was a fabulous way to practice law if you were not in a full family law firm.
So you've been a mentor to a number of us who are fellows here and others in the academy and in other chapters by virtue of some of the work you've done. But when you're down in LA in your early years, who were your mentors and what did you get from them?
Well, 2. I'm going to jump on your question here. The first was the partner, Larry Freeman. Larry Freeman taught me how to look at my case from the eyes of the other lawyer. Super difficult art to learn, but if you can do that, if you can hone that skill, you can understand what's getting in the way of settling the case, or you can see what they're probably going to try and do if you got to try the case. My other great one, which maybe it's not in great order, is a lawyer by the name of Joe Maness, fabulous lawyer in LA, who taught me how to cross-examine a doctor and rip his financials to absolute shred. Unfortunately, it was my client he was doing it to, but there you go.
And any other significant mentors in your career?
In my career? Yeah, this one's kind of tough because I wasn't expecting this person to show up because they claimed they were retiring. But somebody super important to me is Diana Richmond. She taught me how to communicate in a way that it could be received by the intended recipient in a way that they could accept it. And that's a skill I didn't have before I met her. And it's a skill I've tried to impart to every person I've attempted to mentor. And Vanessa Wills will tell you that when she worked with us and she would bring me a piece of writing that she intended to either send to opposing counsel or it was a brief to be sent to the court, I would say, write like Diana Richmond. And what I want you to do is get out of your lawyer chair and go sit in your client chair and read it. So that was probably the most other important influential person in my life. And I weren't expecting you to be here, so it's a little embarrassing.
So, licensed in 77. I know you and Mom moved up here in 95. So 18 years down there, 27, turning on 28 years up here. How did the practice differ for you since your defection from the South?
Defection from the South. Southern California had, and for all recent experiences still has, you fight about everything. You don't give up even the easy stuff. You don't give up the easy stuff on the hopes that the other side can't prove the easy stuff. It's really difficult. When I moved up here in 95, you quickly learned that the idea was to try and focus on some resolution that everybody could live with. And if that couldn't be obtained, okay, you go try the case. So that was okay. I explained it a couple of years after I got up here by saying that if you were in Los Angeles and a colleague stabbed you in the back, it was your fault because you weren't looking out. If you got stabbed in the back in Northern California, especially in Napa, the stabber would be virtually ostracized, which was a wonderful change. I really enjoyed that.
Most embarrassing trial moment?
I'm sorting through many. Okay. LA, there's a lawyer by the name of Joseph Tabak who has since passed away. Fabulous trial lawyer. I was at a hearing to bifurcate the validity of a premarital agreement. I lost because Joe had convinced the judge that if he kept the pressure on me, I'd probably settle. So as I went from Department 6 to Department 1 to get my trial date, which was about 200 yards, Joe put his arm around me, and as we walked down the hall of all of the family law trial departments, and there were about 15 of them on that hallway, he would introduce me to all of his friends and say, this is Bob Blevans, he's a really good lawyer, but he just lost a motion to bifurcate a PMA. Can you believe that?
So you go from an auto body repairman who wants to be a history professor to a family law attorney who's pretty well known for making forensic accountants and CPAs feel pretty uncomfortable when they're in the box. Not yours, the other side's.
Usually the other side's the expert,
so,
I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm hoping my own expert's feeling relatively comfortable.
How did you go about developing that skill set?
You probably are all aware of the Gersey Snyder firm. A bazillion years ago when Don Gersey was actually practicing and I was getting larger and larger cases, I got handed off to a young guy in their firm who was about my age, and as he was...
By the name of David Blumenthal.
Kind of a good guy. And we spent our time arguing about whether that's the right approach or this is the right approach, and whether he can handle this particular economic issue or it's a lawyer issue. And between all of the arguments that we had, we really worked out a way where both of us understood better what our roles were and what the right answer would be. And I actually carried that tradition forward of arguing until you get it right with all of the time I spent with Ron Granberg. He would come to my office to get ready to do some presentation, And my staff thought we hated each other because all we did was yell at each other about who was right and who was wrong, which is what David Blumenthal and I did.
Speaking of Ron, the following question is from my mother. Have you and Ron ever had a romantic relationship? All right. So does my mother. So, if I'm not mistaken, you are the only active member of our chapter who has previously been a fellow in the Confederacy, and
Or inactive.
which means you've applied to the Academy twice. Why?
What happened?
What has it meant to you? No, not what has it meant to you?
Well, I originally joined the Academy in Southern California, which was an interesting process. And when I ended up deciding to move to Northern California, Lorraine West, bless her heart, who was the executive director, said I had to reapply. And I kept trying to say, you know, Northern California and Southern California basically have the same law, not always the same, but basically the same. But she told me that if she let me skate from one chapter to the other, she'd have to let all those snowbirds moving to Florida escape. So I actually had to go through that process. I had my first meeting on a Wednesday night at Palio d'Asti on Sacramento Street. Tony Dick was the president of the chapter at the time. And what made the transition from a mature practice in Los Angeles, where you knew the judges and you had your experts and you had your client referrals, to Northern California was the chapter, really. Tony said nice stuff about me. He said he had called Steve Kolodny about me, who said nice things, probably thinking I was someone else. And by Friday, I had 2 referrals from Academy Fellows for cases. And when I needed to call somebody, because I didn't know what the rules were in Marin, which, by the way, I figured out were secret rules, apparently.
You have to get this document called the Winter Report. It's the only way to
exactly.
figure it out. Okay.
So the Academy made it very simple to make that transition.
You've held leadership positions in the chapter. You're a diplomat of the college. You and Ron have spent probably a couple of years worth of billable time trying to put together presentations.
What do you mean trying to put together?
I've seen it happen. It's sort of more of a trying than a putting. That on some of the more complex topics in family law to present around the country. It's clear you love the topic. It's sort of a long wind up to my last 2 questions before Renee gives us the hook and pulls us out of here.
I thought you said we were going to 8:30.
I'm going as long as the wine's pouring. So, you're 45 years in, and if our time slips is accurate, this is going to be the first year in 4 decades you've billed less than 1,500 hours. So as you start to pull back from the practice, what are you going to miss about it?
I'll talk about the same thing that Bill talked about. It's the fellowship. It's the people that I've gotten to know and trust, the people that I've been on the other side of and left courtrooms as friends. That's going to be difficult because it's going to be hard to keep those relationships going no matter how hard you really try. The intellectual part of it, okay, but 45 years is a career. It's okay to spend your time doing some other stuff and having some other interests, but it's the people. Also the clients. I mean, it's nice getting those, cards that say, you saved my sanity during the process, and that's very rewarding, and that's not going to happen anymore. The intellectual part, however, I will still have to hone my intellectual skills because to convince my wife Jennifer anything takes real talent, okay?
Amen to that. So speaking of Mom, this last year, you and Mom didn't make it to Chicago after 20 some odd years of being at the annual meeting. And rumor has it that might be a new pattern. And you've talked about the fellowship here with the Academy and the role you've had as a fellow in 2 chapters. As you start to distance yourself from participation, is there any words of wisdom you have for those of us who are going to be here?
I don't know if they're words of wisdom, but I have some advice. I went through the whole thing.
I'm distancing myself from these comments.
The presidency. I watched new people put their own imprimatur on it, on running the chapter. It's a difficult thing to run. But there's two things that I think are important to remember. The first, in my view, is the process of new fellows. And for this, I'm going to give Belinda Hanson a nod, because she came up with something, I don't know whether you remember this or not, but during our time on the membership committee, she came up with what I thought was the most brilliant way of thinking about new fellows. It used to be that when you were an Academy Fellow, they sent you a book. This is, for you younger people, it was paper, okay? It had words printed on it. But it was about this thick, and it was in a light blue color, and it was the certified list of Academy Fellows. And it was divided by state, and inside of each state, it was divided by city. And in each city, there was every Academy Fellow and a biography about a paragraph long about who they were. And what you did when you had a client who needed a lawyer in Atlanta is you'd pick up the book, you'd turn to Georgia, which right now is a really difficult thing to do anyway, but you would go to Atlanta, which isn't such a difficult place to go, and you'd see these people, and what you knew with certainty is that the chapter in Georgia only admitted people that handled complex cases with some degree of ethics that you could rely on, and you could send that person to these people with confidence. And it was called the Blue Book test. I give that to Belinda. It was a really smart thing. And I think if you continue to do that, you not only pay appropriate homage to what the Academy is, but you do, if you don't do that, you do a horrible disservice to every other fellow across the United States.